All right, so guys, we had to actually take a break from the first, like basically part one of the interview, because Joe had to go he's got stuff lined up. He's doing this big book launch. He's going to be on Bloomberg and Good Morning DC, and so he's got all kinds of media that he's doing right now. So he had to run to another interview. So we are actually, fast forward a couple of weeks, we are going to finish up with part two of the book. So Joe, I appreciate you coming back and finishing up with us.
Dr. Nick, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So we had talked last about deconstructing time. And now I really want to get into those three inclinations that you talk about in the book and the ways that you can slow down to speed up and be more productive. And so if you want to get us started off, and then we'll just kind of take it from there.
Yeah, sounds great. So there's three internal inclinations that the research points to the top leaders, CEOs, performers have just naturally. And these inclinations, we're not saying that if you don't have them, that somehow you should never be a leader. But we really want to know how prominent is this inside of you, and to be able to assess it. So we have a whole assessment that's included within the book to walk you through your internal inclinations. So those three internal inclinations are curiosity, an outsider's perspective, and an ability to move on it. And so let's look at that first one, curiosity. So often, we think about curiosity as something that is for our childhood or something else. I mean, I have a 7-year-old and 10-year-old, and they're just curious all the time. They're trying to figure out, is this something that happens on a regular basis, or is this like abnormal? So their first rainbow, their first car accident, their first, all these firsts are, like, do people get in car accidents every day, or is this something that's going to happen all the time, or is this abnormal that, should only happen once or twice in a lifetime? Mm-hmm. And so that curiosity is so prominent in kids that then we see that actually top performers are able to enact that within their businesses. That instead of saying, okay, we're going to do this Facebook ad campaign, and if we don't get any opt-ins, all of a sudden it's a failure. Like, of course we don't want a quote failure, but we can get data and information from that and having that curious perspective when we enter in.
I couldn't agree more. I think that curiosity, the people that are listening to this interview are probably curious. They're trying to figure something out. They're trying to grow their businesses. And I would imagine that in your profession, it's similar to chiropractic in that there's a lot of people that we talked about this earlier, that there's a lot of people that went to school to do the thing, and now they're running a business. And that creates a lot of curiosity real quick if you want to stay in business. So
yeah. Well, and so often, we think that there's just this one way to do it. We want the blueprint. We go back to the industrialist model of saying, I want to just set it and forget it. Mm-hmm. But the reality of our modern world is that we can't. We need to be changing and adapting and evolving. And so that old way of thinking, like the industrialists, is just outdated. And so curiosity, instead of waiting for that aha moment or that eureka moment, the best thing that we can say is, well, that's interesting. Why did that happen? Mm-hmm. And then just keep going into that. I even think about my two daughters that are 7 and 10. My two nieces were over the other day who are 3 and 5. So I had 4 girls under the age of 10, all playing outside, squealing, running around. And then it got super quiet, and I'm like, uh-oh, got to go outside. Like, got really quiet. Yeah. And they're all standing around this dead mouse. And I hear them at first say, ooh, that's gross. And then they start asking questions, and they say, well, how do you think it died? Do you think an owl would eat it? Do owls eat dead mice or only live mice? Should we bury it? Should we put it in the woods? And all these questions just out of a dead mouse. Mm-hmm. And that those new eyes of looking at our businesses and looking at things and saying, well, that's so interesting. What is happening there? Like, that's what top leaders do over and over.
You mentioned dead mouse, and I saw one on my walk on. I live in like downtown Chicago, and so that's our dead mouse connection. You mentioned Facebook ads, and chiropractors are the worst about thinking that there is some magic bullet for like how to triple your practice using some $21 new patient special, and that is. If I could impart anything onto people, it's to be curious and to figure out why that is a bad idea.
Yeah, well, and I think that leads into the second internal inclination, which is to have an outsider's perspective. That the people that are top performers are the people that retain that outsider's perspective. If we've ever had any sort of job in our entire lives, we know this. Like, you go to your first day and they're explaining their systems, and you're like, why are they doing it that way?
Mhm.
I remember when I first started working at a community college as a college counselor there, they were handwriting their progress notes. This was 2009. This was not like the early 80s or something. 2009, 2010, they're handwriting their progress notes. And then when they filed it, they would put it in a binder by day. So if I wanted to find out if whoever had come ever, they had to go back to the old calendar and look through the handwritten calendar for that person's name and then go to that day to pull the progress note. They weren't even doing it by last name.
Yeah.
And so, to have an outsider come in and say, this is peculiar. There are so many ways we could even just have a HIPAA compliant Google form that would be better than what we're doing here.
Yeah.
That actually is a superpower for people that have that outsider's perspective. There was this research study done where they brought groups of 6 to 8 people together, and they would show them a different color. They would show them either blue or green, and they would just hold it up to the group. Is this green? Is this blue? For the most part, they agreed. There was a few in the middle that they didn't agree on. But the second part of the study, same size group, they would bring in 2 research assistants that were working with the researchers, and there were some of the blues and some of the greens that they would say the opposite. So it would clearly be a green, and they say, that really looks blue to me, or that looks green to me, even though it was blue.
Mhm.
And they found that statistically, those outsiders had significantly more and statistically significant level of influence over the group than what they should have had. And we see this in lots of different research studies out there, that the outsiders really have these new eyes. And so we have the Elon Musks of the world, or the Albert Einsteins, who have moved cultures and moved industries. And they bring this very different way of thinking about things into new industries, more than maybe the people that have been stuck inside those industries.
And I think the curiosity and the outsider's perspective probably go hand in hand. I mean, I know, like, personally, like, I feel a resonance with both of those. And I feel like when I am looking at our systems or looking how we do things, I am only doing it looking from the outside because I'm curious. And, it drives my team nuts sometimes, because I'll, tend to blow up things that people have gotten comfortable with. But I feel like that's what, moves the ball forward. And sometimes the bombs, are not great. And other times it's like the revelation that puts you on the right path.
Well, and by that being natural for you, like, it's clear why you've been a successful leader, because I imagine the third internal inclination also then comes natural for you, which is the ability to move on it instead of overthinking it. So if we think about a typical spectrum, on one side we have speed, and on the other side we have accuracy. And there's areas in life we want to be accurate. If I'm going to go in for surgery at the hospital, I'm going to go under the knife. I want my doctor, I want her to take as long as she needs to take to be accurate with my surgery. Like, I don't care about speed at that point. I want to make sure that I'm safe and things are done how they're supposed to be done. I want my airline pilot to be as accurate as they can be. But most of what we do in business, speed is going to win more times than accuracy. And so if we write a blog post and we miss citation something, that's okay. We can change that. If we find that we did a brochure and we did it incorrectly, we can change it. We don't need to be paralyzed by perfection, because we actually get more done when we move forward quicker, because we get that feedback loop. We get those people telling us what works, what doesn't. We're able to see, if we're working 3 times faster than our competition, we now are getting those analytics 3 times faster as well. So we can adjust, change, and shape in a way that our competition can't either.
Yeah. And the those 2 examples that you gave, those are high stakes, surgery, flying a plane. Most of the things that you're going to be moving on, most of the decisions that you make in your business are very low stakes. They're like, no one's life is at stake, and your business is going to go on just fine, whether you do it or whether you don't. But when you can be fast with those low stake decisions, and not like, if you overthink every decision that really has no major impact one way or another, and you do that for every one, you just never get anything done. And like you said, you never get the data back on whether it was a good idea. I've done all kinds of dumb ideas quickly, but I find out pretty quickly that they're dumb ideas, and then you try other ones, and or you like tweak that one, and that ends up turning into a good idea. So
even on our team, we have a saying, proceed until apprehended. And the idea is, I want creativity and innovation to lead what we're doing.
Mhm.
And if you go out on a limb and then you realize it really didn't work, it screwed up, it cost us a bunch of money, okay, you're apprehended. Come back a little bit. You're still a part of the team. You're not going to get fired over taking some risks, because the amount of times that I would have limited innovation just by saying, I need to approve everything that goes out on social media. I need to see it all. Like, I remember I went on vacation and this one team member made this beautiful video series bringing together all these podcast quotes and images and music. And she hadn't bought the rights to the music. And it was like, okay, this is amazing. You did a great job. We need to pull this music right away because it got flagged on Facebook, and we'll use music we purchased. Okay, you were apprehended for that, but what kind of limitations would I have just set on that, where she wouldn't have even done this creative work that I hadn't asked her to do? She just took it upon herself to do. That one little thing we could change out and move forward. And then we had this beautiful video that brought together all these different podcast episodes.
Yeah. And I think that's a good example for chiropractors when they are creating content, creating things for social media, is let your team run a little bit, and you just have to like keep an eye on it. And like you said, if you find something that isn't quite right, you can pull the leash back a little bit and correct it. But most of the time, it's going to be just fine, and there's nothing that you need to do. And 10x gets done versus you having to micromanage everything, especially when if you don't know a lot about it or you're not passionate about it, you're just going to slow or stop the process.
Yeah. And I mean, you just think about how we're trained in the medical world, where whether it's a paper or a test or, some licensing exam, we're taught over and over that you prep. Then you either turn in the paper or take the test, and then you get approved or you don't. But that's just not how the business world works. The business world is all about iterations. It's all about changing and growing and improving over time, getting smarter in that process. And so it flies right in the face of how most of our highly educated training has been.
Yeah. Any other parts of the book that we didn't cover that you think are going to be useful to the listeners?
Yeah, so that's the first part, which is the internal inclinations. And then the next two sections are around slowing down and then how to kill it. So we can dive into as much of that as you want.
Let's go into the slowing down, because I think a lot of people hear that.
Yeah, so I think most of our lives, what we live through is we're running full tilt, we're burned out, we're maxed out, and then we expect to do our best work. I remember when I was in Nepal between my undergraduate and graduate work, and I'm at the edge of the Chitwan jungle, and our guide says to us, hey, if we get chased by a rhinoceros, climb a tree. And I asked zero follow-up questions, like, how often does this happen? What kind of tree should we climb? So we enter into the jungle, and within about an hour, we see this wild rhinoceros, and I take a picture. I couldn't tell if it turned out well. It was that old kind of like film camera, so I didn't have a digital camera yet. I take a step forward again, take a picture. I take another step forward, and the rhino charges, and I take off running. I'm outrunning my friend Todd, who I knew I was a sprinter and could outrun him just a little bit, but he had the long distance. Like, I had about 100 yards on him. After that, it's like, he's going to totally have me. But we had a Peace Corps volunteer behind me as another human shield. We just all take off running, blatantly disregarding the advice to climb a tree. So we come back after the rhino stops charging us, and our guide comes down the tree and yells at us, why didn't you go up a tree? I was like, why didn't I go up a tree? Because I'm not going to try some brand new skill while being chased by a rhino. In most of our lives, that's how we live. We're chased by the rhino day after day in our business or our weekends, and we're not going to try something new. We're not going to try something innovative. We just keep defaulting to the way we've done it. We're reactionary to the rhinos in our lives rather than being intentional in saying, how do we want our weekends to look? How do we want our work week to look? And so that middle element of slowing down is saying, I'm going to intentionally slow down here to optimize my brain, to allow my brain to really chill out for a bit, to have some things outside of work that light me up. And then in doing that, knowing that my brain is going to be more optimized next week to absolutely go kill it.
Right. I'm glad the rhino got tired.
I know.
Do they just normally give up like that? Because that might be better advice. Just run 100 yards. They'll get tired.
Yeah, I think it was probably more of a setting its territory, back up, little photographer Joe, more than that he wanted to chase us. But who knows? It wasn't there when we came back. So that
he
was
just
good.
Had lunch, so he was like, "I'll let these guys off."
Back up.
Right. So the third part, I think you said, was to kill it. So slowing down to be able to kill it. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So this last section, I really go into all the neuroscience, and really we view it as kind of a menu-based option instead of, the old industrialist book model was, here's the 5 steps. If you don't do them, you're out. If you do them, you're in. But the new model of books is to say, here's the menu. You are a smart person that can apply and adapt and experiment. And so there's different models within it. So we have the first model, which walks through how do you optimize the things that are already happening in the business. The sprint type model, which is looking at your own sprint type. So how do you get things done? Similar to a personality type within kind of your DNA, looking at the idea of setting soft and hard boundaries so that you can use your environment to get into flow state. And so we walk through a number of those. We can drill into whatever you want to drill into. But really it's a menu of bringing together the neuroscience so that you can get more done after you've optimized your brain.
I always like the personality testing stuff. And they've got all kinds of different ones of like what you're most likely to take action on and what happens when you're under stress and all that. And I always find them fascinating because I have no idea how they are always so accurate for me. But when you said that I think you said like there were different sprint types. Can you talk about that? Like what's the difference between people? And
So the way most people sprint is they hear about sprinting or batching. They say, I guess I should work on something. Maybe I'll set a timer. Maybe I won't. And then they quickly give up on it. And they don't make it really a part of who they are. And usually it's because they haven't matched the way that they sprint with their sprint type. So first we want to think about, how are we doing the actual work when we're working? And so the first one is a time block sprinter. So this is the kind of person that does one type of work for 1 to 4 hours, broken up into 20 to 30 minute segments or sprints. And so, for example, every Thursday, I was working on writing Thursday as the new Friday. And so for that day, the day was blocked out. I had clear 20-minute sprints. I got up every 20 minutes for at least a 1-minute break, using the science that I was writing about in the book to push back against vigilance, decrement, and all these other things. And so when you do that, you're getting one type of task done over a period of time. Whereas a task switch sprinter is somebody that needs that variety. And maybe they've even felt guilty about needing that variety, but it usually came out in the form of, quote, multitasking, which actually the research shows you can't multitask and you do a really crappy job of getting anything done. But instead, you're intentionally saying, for this 20 to 30 minutes, I'm going to work on this one particular task, take a quick break, then work on something else for 20 to 30 minutes, then work on something else. And so the morning is scheduled out with all the sprints that you're going to do in that morning, knowing that they're all big picture things. So that's the type of work. And then the second part of it is when you work. So an automated sprinter is someone that's going to put that in their schedule every single week, and it's going to repeat. So for example, every Thursday, I was working on my book, and I'm writing it every Thursday. It was blocked out. My assistant knew, don't schedule anything there. I'm just going to be doing that every single week. Whereas an intensive sprinter is the type of person that needs to go away to get something done. So Dr. Jeremy Sharp from the Testing Psychologist podcast, he goes and he rents an Airbnb for 2 or 3 days. It's always walking distance from a vegan restaurant. He actually looks at the menu ahead of time and selects his food so that he doesn't have any decision-making fatigue. It has an outdoor space, and he brings a lot of different types of work. So he's not doing that time block sprinter where it's all writing a book. Instead, what he's doing is he's task switching. So he might do bookkeeping for part of a morning. He might record a bunch of podcasts. He might do some networking calls. He might do some social media planning. And so that idea that I need to get away from my family or from my house to go do that, some people feel guilty doing that. But when they really start to pair their sprint type with the way that they actually sprint, they end up getting so much more done in a shorter period of time.
I love that. I feel like I am definitely like a task switcher, but I feel like I lose a lot of efficiency by being a task switcher. Like I naturally want to just have like ADHD and just kind of like want to do a bunch of different things. Is there a way to where I feel like I would be more productive if I blocked out like a specific task for a specific amount of time, but sometimes I just get distracted like as I'm going through it. Do you have anything that you recommend to like, if I know I would be better at this one, but I'm naturally this one, do you have any way of like working on that?
Yeah. So a couple things. So I would pair your environment with the specific task. So even having different lighting for when you're doing email compared to different lighting when you're doing podcasts, or to just trigger your brain differently, to have different playlists for different tasks. then especially for people that maybe are a little more inattentive, it helps train your brain to say, oh, it's email time. So you jump back in quicker. Also, I would say maybe a 20-minute sprint is too long. Maybe doing a 10-minute sprint where you're like, I'm going to just crush it with email right now. And then I'm going to take a 1-minute break to intentionally take a few minutes beforehand to say, what am I going to really get done during this sprint? Defining that before you do it and setting a shorter timer is probably going to be more effective. So I'd rather see you have a couple 8 to 10-minute sprints that are back to back, where you are so in the flow, you feel like the sprint timer actually interrupted you, than to get to that point that you're distracted. So starting to be aware of at what point is your personal threshold in regards to your vigilance decrement. So vigilance, how well you pay attention, decrement meaning breaking down over time. So University of Illinois showed that if you have a 1-minute break, that's usually enough to reset you. So for you, it might need to be every 8 minutes. You have a quick 1-minute break, shake it off, get back down, do another 8 minutes versus doing the typical 20 to 30 minutes. But then you're going to build up your stamina over time, because you'll see in that 8 minutes, I got done what I usually get done in 15 minutes. And then it starts to get a little more addictive where you're like, I'm going to push myself a little bit more. And so having that experimental mindset, even with your sprints, can help you then figure out your own kind of DNA around sprinting.
Right now, I'm experimenting with 10-minute work sprints and 35-minute Twitter breaks. So I feel like I've got enough experimentation with that. So I'm ready to move on to your.
There you go.
Because of this, the way that chiropractors work, a lot of times, and ideally we would be block scheduling our patient time. A lot of people, like, they see patients 30, 40 hours a week. What would be your recommendations, especially to somebody who maybe who allows patients to kind of scatter their time so that they're not as blocked together? What would be your recommendations on scheduling a week?
Yeah, so when I work with practitioners that are really trapped in that kind of client work model, a few different factors. So if you're billing insurance, to at least start with looking at what's the least paying insurances that you have the least number of clients that are the hardest insurances to work with, and to really evaluate, do you want to keep taking that insurance? Because if you have a handful of clients, you get paid the least amount and they're really hard to work with, I mean, that's staff time, staff energy that's being wasted on that. So I would start there. I would look at continuing to grow a private pay model. And there's lots of different models that are out there to do that, to help you level up beyond just the typical reimbursement models. And then looking at if there's ancillary services that you can add to boost income outside of your own time. So whether that's having an associate, whether that's having a nutritionist or other folks in the office, and then really continuing to try to streamline that client experience. And so I remember I saw a chiropractor a couple years ago, and they were always 2 to 3 people behind in their time. And so you check in and I'd sit there for 45 minutes. From a client user perspective, that's just bad scheduling. And if you have clients that are coming and expecting to sit there like for 2 or 3 sessions ahead of time, I get that you want to have people back to back, but you want to start to train your clients as to how that looks. And so even little things like saying, if your session, if you aren't there within 5 minutes of when it's supposed to start, you're going to be charged for it, or you may lose that session and you have to wait in line in this other way. So there's so many ways that you can restructure the flow of clients coming in so that you're not burning yourself out, and instead you're actually spending the time doing either the client work or the big picture business work.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you do have big blocks of client time, do you recommend doing that big picture, like CEO type work before that, after that, using lunch breaks, or just like blocking off like Tuesday mornings or Thursday afternoons to get that stuff done?
Yeah, so I think that if we're looking at big picture, you'd want to ask yourself, what from my week is where I want to spend my best time? And so when do I want my brain, or when do I know that my brain is at its best? And the thing that's going to help you level up the most is where you want to put that. So if, for example, for me, I know from about 10 a.m. till noon is my very best time every day. My coffee's kicked in, the kids are at school, I'm not hungry yet. That's the time that, if I have something big picture, I want to put that in right there. And so figuring out for yourself, where is my energy the highest? When am I most creative? When am I not burned out at all? That's when you want to spend that big picture time. The client work, for a lot of us that are highly skilled, you can kind of get on autopilot and don't need as much of that creative energy. So if you spend your whole day doing that and then say, I'm going to work on big picture stuff during my lunch hour, You may have just spent a whole lot of energy on clients, and that big picture, you're not as creative during. So I would say wherever your very best energy is, that's where you want to put the work on the very best work that you're doing.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that chiropractors don't think that they can do that, to where it's like you could see patients from 8 to 10 and then from 10 to 12 work on that big picture. And it almost like that 8 to 10 time, it's not long enough to like really wear you out. So it's enough to like get the juices flowing, and then your ideal work time. So you don't have to take the whole morning off. You could still have some patient time and some big picture time in the same shift, basically.
When you actually have to believe that that time is better than seeing patients. And so, if you want to give yourself a job, then give yourself a job.
Mhm.
Like, you're just seeing clients, you're never leveling up. You're not creating a business. You're just exchanging your time for money.
Right.
That's good enough for a lot of people. If
Yeah.
you want to build a business that automates income outside of your own time to give you more time freedom, that's where you have to find ways to bring in income outside of yourself. And so that could be the associates, the ancillary services, e-courses, podcasts, all sorts of different things that clients or patients may want. But you're not going to be able to do those things if you're always stuck in the actual patient work.
Yeah. It's the working on the business versus working in the business.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about how they can get the book. This has been super helpful, and I'm for sure going to be buying my copy, or 10 as we'll find.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And you referenced the 10 book buy. So I'm offering the Thursday is the New Friday mastermind group, which starts the first Thursday in November 2021. It's going to be 6 sessions that we meet. We're going to be skipping Thanksgiving, so it'll be over 7 weeks. And yeah, if you buy 10 copies of Thursday is the New Friday, wherever you purchase those, so it could be your local bookstore, it could be Amazon, Target.com, wherever it is you buy your books, then you just submit your receipt over at thursdayisthenewfriday.com. And in that mastermind group, the first third of it, we're going to be diving in deeper into the content of Thursday is the New Friday. The middle third, we're going to spend doing some hot seats and helping people practically learn about how to do the 4-day work week, where they're stuck, talk deeper. And then the last section, I want people to leave having networked with some amazing people. I mean, there's no point in bringing together these top podcasters and influencers and people that are thinking big if they can't meet each other. To me, the biggest power is that networking and connecting and having, honestly, friends that you can text and just say, hey, like, what e-course are you using for your platform? Or, what podcasts are you on lately? So that you can all level up together. And so my goal is that people leave with 6 to 10 new great connections to be able to level up. So yeah, you purchase 10 copies of Thursday is the New Friday, and then submit your receipt over at thursdayisthenewfriday.com.
And you can find the book, like he said, wherever you buy your books, whether it's Amazon or local bookstore. Well, Joe, you're my first 2-part interview, so that's unique. But I also I told you, or no, I texted my assistant after our part 1, because sometimes he'll like schedule me interviews and I won't know who the person is, and I'll like do like 15 minutes of research before the interview. And I'm like, I texted him before our interview. I'm like, this guy's not even a chiropractor. Like, and then after I got done, or after we got done with part 1, I texted him and I was like, man, that was one of the best interviews that I think we've done. So I think you brought a ton of value. I'm glad that we got to meet each other, and I'll look forward to being in the mastermind.
Yeah, I can't wait to hang out with you more in the mastermind and to just stay connected and keep leveling up together.
All right, guys. Well, remember, Thursday is the New Friday is the name of the book. thursdayisthenewfriday.com is the website. And Joe, like I said, really appreciate your time, and I wish you all the success.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nick.